Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is my Trailmaster MB200-2. Alright, today is going to be the day that we separate the rear end from the front end. In order to do that, there's a few steps. This engine mount cradle section comes out, it's bolted in. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to be removing these handlebars from this bike, and I'll take the throttle cable, whole thing, one assembly, and the brake. I'll just disconnect it and attach the handle back there somewhere so it's with the rear aft of the bike. So I'll get that done and I'll come back to you. Alright, I have my brake cable set to the rear, the handlebars off, the throttle went with it. I cut all my zip ties and such. The only thing I'm left with is the motor mount. I'm going to take that out. I'm going to pull this last bolt out and this should fall down. Yep. This. Grr. This is not a good idea. And by good idea, I don't mean what I'm doing. I mean what somebody did before me. This is terrible. These bolts weren't even all that tight, okay? And there's no bushings or anything in here. Okay, there's a little bit of wiggle room. All right, down there as well. So they kind of counteract against one another, but not really. We might have to adjust. I mean, look how loose this is. Okay, this is a low hour, stock frame. There is right here, look at this. You see that in that bushing? You see that play? That side to side stuff they got going? That's not good. Not at all. Instead of trying to make a continuous loop and a rigid frame, we're going to try to work with the sections of the frame that are breaking because of stuff like this. Oh man. The next thing I'm going to have to do is make some reference points on the frame so that when I cut this thing up and I get my slugs and such in there and all my holes drilled for my rosette welds, then I still, have an idea of where this thing is going to line up. So when I push it back together, I'm just going to line up, a few different points and then commit to welding. When we do this, we're going to do it in two parts. I'll be cutting this one off somewhere up in here. I'd like to go slightly higher, but I'm not sure yet how this penetration is going to interrupt my inside diameter. I'm obviously not going to be able to get all up in there with a hole saw. So we could hole saw these out and then cram her right up, but we're trying to retain this idiocy that came with this Trailmaster. On the original design, let's talk about that. They had the rigid loop and a regular motor mount. They had trouble with the crack that was going on back here. So somehow this is supposed to reduce vibration and impact somehow. It's supposed to absorb it and not crack. So that's probably why they use these bushings. So it's not that somebody wasn't trying or they didn't think outside of the box. It really wasn't done right, okay? It's not quite heavy duty enough. Maybe if they had done a better job with this gusset plate or this dog bone they put in here, I mean, maybe if they just used better tubing, all right? But I'm going to be that guy, and we're going to find out if this works. Oh boy. I'm going to figure out how to make those marks. I just took a piece of duct tape and I'm laying out a nice lineal line. Our cut is going to be this way. When I go to weld this thing back together, we want something that is going to line up straight from a longer distance than just, an inch or two away from the cut itself. That way, the frame is straight. Now, you could take your time and try to figure out where the center is and center this line and all that good stuff. But as long as this is straight here and we cut it and we put everything back together and that line is straight, the frame is going to be straight, okay? The next step to this is taking my rotary tool and I'm going to probably use a cutting disc and I'm going to make a very light etch. All right? That way I don't lose this thing. This is very, very important. We're going to be doing the same thing down here. However, this doesn't have to get cut off while it's still connected to the frame. It's going to be a whole lot easier to deal with that when we just have the front end. I could take this off and, we could take the wheels and such off, but like I said, I'm trying to do this in the least amount of steps possible. We got one piece of that tape off. There we go. That scratch isn't going anywhere. When I do the welding on this, it's going to be at the seam and in a few sporadic places. Nothing is going to disappear. I'm not going to be grinding up here. At least not while I'm doing this part of the frame modification. There's another part to the story too. Before we get there though, I'm going to go ahead and make one more reference point on either side of the frame. That way, I have 3 of them to line up. These ones are just going to be a little bit shorter. My last one got away from me a little bit, but that's why we make 3 of them. When we put this back together, we can line it up and put another piece of tape if we want to, and run just the ends, you know, in a center, something like that, to reestablish a perfectly straight edge. Next thing I'm going to do, guys, make that slice. I took a piece of painter's tape and I just laid it where it felt good. I'm offset from this section of the frame. If you look down slightly, you know, I'm not sure, again, if they looped anything through here like they did down here, and you know, we still have to deal with this flying buttress that they installed up here. So I figure if I make this cut on either side of the line, really, boy oh boy, I think I'm going to cut this side. There's going to be a solid steel tube offset to each side. So I'm doing it. I think the break happens just behind, right about there. So this is the only part I'm concerned about, really. I could always brace that after too. I'm just going to tip it right over on its side. Well, for the love of mini bikes, guys, this is how you build them better. Oh man, somebody told me I'd have 2 mini bikes after I did that. Ooh, look at that. Technically, we're still attached. Uh-oh. There we go. Looks like a clean break. Now, I can take my inspection light and lower it down inside. Alright, so we are clear all the way. There you go, you can kind of see it there, see? To the corner of the frame. And by corner, I mean this bend here. So, these don't interrupt anything at all. That means we can really get a long sluggo right up in there. All right, we'll take a look at the front of the frame now. Oh yeah, it looks like we are clear all the way up to the neck. Booyah. Enter the 1-inch pipe. I went down to my steel yard. I told them the dimensions I was working with, and the outside of this is 1 inch and 5/16. It's just a little too big to fit inside our frame. Even if it was a shorter piece and I was dead on, all right, we're still going to be bound up. Now, when I'm reassembling this thing, if I leave the fork on and such, I'm not really going to be able to bang that tube back onto this to sleeve it real good, right? We want it to just slide in and fit snug. The welds are going to hold it. That way, once this thing is in there, we can kind of just like barely, twist and do what we need to do to get our reference marks to line up on the two frames. So, I'm going to have to get a few thousandths off of this pipe. I don't have anything fancy like a lathe, so I'm going to be using mostly my angle grinder, I think. I'll show you what I have for it. First, I'm going to try to make my measurements and cut 2 pipes to manageable lengths rather than try to work the entire thing. Alright, so we get to keep this. I picked up 5 feet of this pipe, 2 pieces of 1/8 inch steel plate, and I got a piece of 1.5 inch square tubing, probably a couple feet long. $17, guys. Put in the effort. Here's my 2 sections. That's all we got to clean up now. I'm going to have to take these outside, get them in the vise, see what I have for grinding disc. My first pass is going to be with a light cutting and grinding wheel. I'm basically going to work the scale off the outside of these metal tubes, and as I'm going, I'll check with the frame and see where I'm at. Once I get the scale off, I might switch to a sanding disc. Here we go. I just have my shorter section with the scale removed. That's all. You can still see some of it. Look at that. Okay? I could drive this in there and it would be super duper tight. When fitting these 2 halves, we're going to want just a little bit of slide. So, not a lot. I mean, we want it tight, but it would behoove us if we could at least, barely twist the pipe. So, I'm going to get out there with a sanding disc and just barely kiss these things. There you go. So you can see the difference. I hit it with that grinding disc. Now, I'm just going to tag it with that sander. Alright. Now, I'm just barely in and I can twist. I could really bang that in now. So, I'm going to give this one more pass. Just so that we're not messing around with it later on. And we're trying to make these two ends come together. Alright, let's go see how we did. Oh yeah. Once that's in there, that'll be sweet. I did both of the tubes exactly the same. Where'd I put the other one? Oh, there. There it is. Yeah, buddy. I won't be giving us any back talk. Now, we have another choice here. I'm going to be cutting off this section somewhere so I can put this tube in. When lining this up, I think I'm going to make my marks, right, so that we have something telling us where the alignment is. But also, when I put this together, I'll probably weld this short tube into this section first up here, and then connect this section to the engine cradle and get those bolts in there so that I know when this weld grabs onto this pipe that it doesn't twist it or pull it in a manner that those don't line up. That would be a big pain in the butt down the road. The next part I'm going to be after is these stock gusset plates. I'm going to cut them as close as I can and then use my grinder to clean up the edges. Not going to lie, this part took me about an hour and 40 minutes to do a nice clean job. I used my rotary tool with a mini, micro disc and cut the edges out as close as I could. And then I went back with my grinder and then a sanding disc. Everything is nice and flush. That's all I need. I went ahead and made 2 more reference marks, 1 on each side. We're also going to have those bolts going through from the cradle, for lack of better words, that will somewhat guide this thing straight to where this section needs to be. We could do this in 2 parts and do the top, bolt it all together, yada yada yada, but at some point this has to be able to come off. This is going to get welded, that's going to get welded. It makes more sense to do this all at once. That way, when it grips and does its thing, it's just done. We're not going back and messing with it again. Before I cut this tube right about here, I'm going to be drilling a series of holes in the frame where I'm going to be setting some rosette welds onto the pipe below it. While this piece is on here, it makes for a nice sturdy surface to set some pilot holes and drill a few out. So I'm going to do that right quick. Alright, all my holes are drilled. I had to take off my front fender just so I could get a couple up under here. Now I can make that final cut. Well, I could have cut that a little bit straighter, but that's not going to hurt me when we're putting this back together. It's kind of like a puzzle. Once this insert is set all the way in, and then I bring this end up to this end, it'll match up. We'll be alright. The last thing I did tonight was go around with my Dremel and a grinding stone, and I cleaned all of my rosette holes. That way I'm ready to assemble and weld. Tomorrow we'll get this thing put back together and welded right up, because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.